Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to another Kepler live chat. We have another teacher with us, a teacher who's teaching ancient Hebrew this coming year, Mr. Graham Sommers. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've been looking at some modern languages and some modern language teachers in recent conversations. And so you're not only a Hebrew teacher, but also Latin. Mm-hmm. You've been a student of Latin. Mm-hmm. Well, tell us a little bit about your background, and sure. I could definitely tell from your teacher profile and your course description that you're particularly excited about Hebrew. Yep. Yeah, I'd love to hear just sure. more broadly as well.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of the journey started for me in high school. My freshman year, I really started reading the Bible for the first time, and once that happened, learning the biblical languages was just something obvious that I would love to do. It was just kind of, I never had to think about that. I think probably because my dad had studied Greek and had Greek books around the house. So I started learning Greek when I was a sophomore and loved it. Just fell in love with being able to read the Bible in its original language. And had a wonderful teacher who would come to my house a couple times a week to teach me Greek.
Nice.
It was really nice. And then the next was Hebrew. And when I was a senior, it was an early college program. So the government paid for me to learn biblical Hebrew at a university nearby, which is pretty great.
Did they say why this was beneficial to the government?
No. Well, this isn't like, it was called PSEO, so you could take college courses and get high school credit.
Yes,
that sort of thing. So
Okay.
I was happy about that
for sure.
So that was in high school. So it was early on that I kind of fell in love with the languages, and each time it was kind of motivated by being able to read scripture, but then getting into each of those languages, the kind of falling in love with just the grammatical side of it, the syntax of those languages as languages was something that I got excited about. And then kind of the next step, I suppose, would be coming to New St. Andrews here and studying Latin. And that really was a different step for me, because the pedagogical method that my professor, Mr. Griffith, used was a lot more of a living method. So we spoke a lot of Latin. Our second year course was almost entirely conducted in Latin. And that really was very different than the way I had studied Greek and Hebrew. There were some similarities, but in many ways very different. And I loved that. And it really made the language come alive even more.
Yes.
Having, I'm not completely fluent in Latin, but having a degree of ability to speak and converse, and it makes the language alive and exciting in a way that just being able to read, you can't quite get as far. So that was an exciting move. And also took more Hebrew classes at New St. Andrews, and specifically really fell in love with Jewish literature. So one of the courses we took was kind of a survey of non-biblical Hebrew texts. So Dead Sea Scrolls, some from the Mishnah, Midrashim, and medieval grammarians and medieval Hebrew poetry. So there's this whole long tradition of wonderful Hebrew literature, very diverse.
Yes.
That I was kind of introduced to and have since fallen in love with and explored more on my own.
Yeah.
So
your passion for Hebrew extends so far as to get you reading older Greek translations of Hebrew works, and I'm sure that you're comparing. And so it was interesting to observe that. Now you're a languages instructor at the Davenant Institute.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you're also designing your own curriculum. In particular, you're designing a Picta Dicta curriculum for Hebrew.
Yep.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the Davenant Institute, what you do there,
okay.
And then I'd love to get a little bit into Picta Dicta.
Yeah. So the Davenant Institute is actually a new gig. So that's going to be starting this fall.
Okay.
So it's brand new to me. My first course offering there will be sort of a course for maybe pastors or post-seminarians who have had some Hebrew, but it's fallen on hard times, as happens sometimes. And it's kind of a course to resuscitate their Hebrew and prepare them for what we hope to be a full, full-bred Hebrew program, so more advanced Hebrew courses.
Yes.
So it's kind of the on-ramp to what I'm hoping to develop further.
Right.
So that'll be in the fall.
That's actually very cool. So first of all, I'll mention that this Kepler Ancient Hebrew course is a part of our continuing adult education offerings. So it's open to upperclassmen, high school upperclassmen, and that's really who the target audience is. But it's also open to adults. So if you either are interested in embarking upon a Hebrew journey, or you need to refresh, then this would be a great option. As well as the Devon Institute. I've as a language teacher myself, I've often been a little befuddled by some of the approaches to teaching ancient languages to pastors, and some of the approaches in seminaries, because they so often seem like approaches that doom the learner to having a certain ceiling and using the language in a certain way. So you were saying about Mr. Griffiths, teaching Latin in a particular way. And then, clearly you have some of your own vision, which we're going to unpack a little more.
Yeah.
But you have something in your class called total physical response. Is that a part of this trying to integrate language a little more fully?
Yeah, it is. This is maybe one of the aspects of the class that students will most remember. Total physical response is very simple. It's discovered, kind of developed by this guy, James Asher, in, 1960s or something.
Okay.
And it's very simple. It's mostly using imperatives to tell the students to do something physically. And they don't need to repeat after you. They don't need to sound out the words.
Right.
You just do the action. So the first words that are usually taught are just get up and sit down. So I could teach you right now, kum, it's to stand up. And I would demonstrate for you. I'd say kum, then I'd point at you and say kum. And you'd stand up and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And it's that responding to the command that there's different ways you can think about it, but sort of invests that word with a very high degree of significance in your brain, because look, you responded to it. It had power to make you respond, and it wasn't an empty word. And so your brain remembers that a lot better than, say, write the Hebrew word down, then write the English word down.
Oh, of course.
That's actually how I learned a lot of vocabulary. I would just write them out in my book. So that's something you can use with some vocabulary.
Yeah, with some, right. There's no way to, there's no way to get around some of that. I just have to learn these words. And in fact, you wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
But we are whole beings.
Exactly.
And, we don't want to just isolate our mind from everything else. If we can bring our body and spirit into the learning of anything, we're going to learn it better. I think that's really interesting.
That's right.
Does that play into, explain Picta Dicta to us, please? Because it's more, so Picta Dicta in Hebrew is under development right now.
It is, yep.
And we'll be able to take a look at it on our screens shortly. But it's a bigger program than that.
Yeah.
And before you actually get into that, thank you, everybody who's tuning in right now. You're welcome to ask us questions as we go, and to make comments telling Mr. Sommers how awesome he is would also be very welcome. But then towards the end of the live, we'll have a specific question and answer time. But do feel free, please, to pipe in whenever you'd like. So let's talk about Picta Dicta as a program.
Yeah. So Picta Dicta is a way of teaching vocabulary primarily through full color illustrations. My wife, Hope, actually is the illustrator for the Hebrew. And these illustrations are based on ancient iconography. So we have artifacts and engravings and things like that from the ancient world that sometimes give us useful information for, what did an ancient oven look like? You think of the word oven. There's a couple of words in Hebrew for oven.
Well, just that aspect would be interesting if, because a primary motivation for studying ancient Hebrew, the primary motivation, of course, is reading the scripture. But then, it's pastors and potential pastors who will particularly be interested. And, how many times do you hear from a pulpit, someone saying, well, ancient houses were built like this, or ancient ovens look like this. And so it lends a little more color and context to the biblical passage. So I can see even that little element being extra exciting.
Right. It is. It's very exciting. Of course, there's times when the data we have isn't conclusive, so you still have to make decisions
Yes.
and be more certain than maybe they were. But we try to make it as legit as possible. Sometimes Hope will read scholarly articles also written on these things, access archaeological databases and stuff. So
Right.
there's research that goes behind the illustrations. Of course, reading biblical verses about ovens and whatnot. So that's the illustrations, and then Pictodicta itself is a platform that very intelligently organizes those illustrations and that information into a way that you can learn those words. So first you're introduced to the words, then you're asked to identify them and then spell them. One thing I'm especially happy about is students learn to spell the words in unpointed Hebrew first, and then in pointed Hebrew, so typing it in. Reading unpointed Hebrew is usually sort of it's kind of like the far reaches. If you've gotten there, you're pretty far, and it's intimidating.
Yeah.
You know, once you no longer have the help of vowel pointing. What I like about this aspect of Pictodicta is it makes it actually something you look forward to, because remembering how to type a word in unpointed Hebrew is actually easier than remembering all the vowels.
Right.
And so that's something students would actually be delighted
Learn
that
to
they
relish
get to do.
the-
It's like, it's easier actually.
I'd actually love to take a look
Yeah.
at Pictodicta on our
Sure.
screens, and I do at some point I want to get into orthography and all that, all
Sure.
the quirks of
Yeah.
learning Hebrew. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a look
Okay.
at Pictodicta. So right now we're looking at the Hebrew vocabulary builder, and viewers can see the word beta there in double
Yes,
parentheses.
data. Yep.
So all right, so I should click on this turny arrow, right?
That's right.
In order
Yep.
to learn consonants.
Yeah,
Should I do
let's
that?
do it.
Let's do it. And whoever was here before got 5 stars on this. All right, learn consonants. In this exercise, begin to learn to spell the Hebrew word by typing consonants without points. How scary.
Yeah.
And I advance here on this arrow. Is that right?
Actually, the little hand at the bottom there. Yep.
Oh, okay.
You can also press
All right.
enter.
So I give a thumbs up and I advance down the line. Okay.
Oaf.
All right.
And this one has already been started. So usually they would give you the audio too. So that's,
well, I've
talking about
turned off audio. As
okay,
well,
there you
so,
go.
So it doesn't bounce.
Yeah,
off the
so
mic.
there'll be, actually, it's my voice saying "oof" for bird or something like that. So that is, again, trying to exercise the ear, not just the eyes, is another good part about this.
Yeah.
So
So when I see this card and I hear "oof,"
Mhm.
and I'm trying not to say egg in French.
Yeah.
So then what do I do?
then you press enter. So it's going to ask you to spell it next. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And this is where we type in. If you probably don't have Hebrew keyboard available. So
What do you mean probably?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is where we type.
So
it
I'm gonna
in.
get it wrong.
Yeah, but you can just enter in something that's all right. There we go.
All right. I guess that's
enter again.
enter.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Oaf.
Oh, I
That's
was
like,
wrong.
You're wrong. You spelled it
Yeah.
wrong. Then it'll give it to you. So there it is in the consonants.
Yes.
And so on and so forth. So this is the
Evan.
the third campaign. There's usually right now there's 4. There'll be more. First one is kind of intro to the words. Second is you choose the picture. Third is this one, the spell the consonants, and then
Okay.
the last one is spell the word with the vowels. So it kind of takes you through a gradient of difficulty.
Now, what separates it from? I mean, I can go and buy Hebrew flashcards.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
There are other resources out there.
Yeah.
And Pictodicta with there are other offerings besides Hebrew has been very well received. And I know that not only you but others are excited about this Pictodicta in Hebrew. What makes it distinctive? Why is this better than something else?
No, that's a great question. Well, I think the advantage is it helps you learn vocabulary in such a way that when you read a text, you're not forced to, for a long time at least, switch between Hebrew and English. So if you memorize oaf as bird, then whenever you see as the English word bird,
Right.
whenever you see that word, especially as a beginner, you think bird in English.
Yes.
Whereas with a picture, you just go oh, that's that animal.
And I can't tell you how valuable that is. By the way, Daniel Fukushan, who is involved in the development of this product, comments, the pressure's on Joffrey, a live streamed Hebrew quiz. Well, I got a 0%.
Yeah.
Well, oops. So I'm teaching Spanish for Kepler right now, and some of these spring courses that we're offering, and convincing the students of the value. Okay, we're counting to 10, right? And so you count uno, dos, tres. Let's see, what's next? Cuatro. Like that act of speaking in English is not helpful. It actually, you want to, even though all you can do right now is count to 10, you want to do it just in Spanish and not say anything else in English. Just take your time, think. We all know you're trying to remember. You don't have to say, let's see.
Right.
It really is very valuable just to stay, however limited your vocabulary may be, as much as possible to stay in the language.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is where I'd want to mention another resource. The resources we're using for my class aren't all developed by me. One of them, they're very professional videos being created by a couple, and it's called Aleph and Beth. And these are free resources for Hebrew, and they're using a kind of a comprehensible Hebrew method. So it's entirely in Hebrew, it's spoken Hebrew. So you're learning the sounds even before the words. And so that's part of the kind of curriculum I'm designing, is just trying to marshal the best that's out there, some of which I'm trying to create, some of which others are creating.
Yes.
So to fulfill that particular kind of element.
What is it called? How would I spell that?
It's called Aleph and Beth, and they're actually on YouTube.
Okay.
They're producing content every day, almost every.
How would I spell that? Olive, like
ALEPH.
Aleph. Yeah,
Aleph.
Sorry, how dare I? I'm not correcting your pronunciation. I'm saying it like I imagine it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And then Beth is like the name Beth.
Aleph and Beth, like that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share that name with everybody in our
and these are completely free. They started in January, so it's very recent, but it's amazing work. So I'm excited about that. Another aspect of the curriculum that relates to Pictodicta is I'm creating short Hebrew stories to be used with Pictodicta. So the Pictodicta chapters actually prepare you to read stories that I'm writing. And this is really important. It's something that seems kind of obvious, but the fact is, in order to learn a language well, you have to read a ton of material in that language. And it's something that Stephen Krashen and others, who are sort of the major figures of second language acquisition, are really emphasizing extensive reading. You have to read a lot, and you have to read something that's, one, interesting to you, and two, easy.
Yes.
And so with Hebrew, unfortunately, there's just not that much material out there to read. Most people cut their teeth on just the Bible. There's nothing else to use. So I'm trying to create stories that you can read almost right off the bat. I mean, maybe a few weeks into the semester, and they'll have their first story. Right. So that they can read as much material as possible.
That's great. That's really powerful. And actually that introduces a dynamism that, often just because of circumstances, but I think also philosophically, one of the weaknesses of language education with the biblical languages is that learners don't leave the Bible. Right? And sometimes it's just not an option. But that sounds impious, right? But really, I mean, if you want to learn the language, like, how many people learning Koine Greek read Marcus Aurelius in Koine? Nobody does, because they dedicate all their time to learning the scriptures. The problem with that is that you don't acquire that dynamic. I'm taking the language in as it is. I'm using it in different ways. I'm encountering unexpected things, right? As soon as you figure out that is Ephesians chapter 1, like all this stuff starts flooding into your head. Yeah. So you need to be exposed to new stuff. And sometimes that's just something that can't be done unless someone comes along and provides the resources.
And really, no, I love that point. And it's something that's I see as kind of part of my mission too, is it's why I call my course Ancient Hebrew, by the way. Despite it's being maybe not as a smart move for marketing. It's like, is that biblical Hebrew or not? I don't know.
Yeah.
But part of my goal and interest is to, like was done for me, introduce students to a wider array of Hebrew.
Yes.
And even if you see those other texts like the Midrashim or the medieval grammarians or Dead Sea Scrolls say, as they're not equal in value, we might say, to the Hebrew Bible. That's fine. But what reading those texts will do is enrich your understanding of Scripture.
That's right.
They'll help you see things that you would never have noticed. That happens all the time when if I'm reading Midrash. They'll point something out where you think, I didn't know 3 pages could be written on why God spoke to both Moses and Aaron in Exodus 12. It's just God said to Moses and Aaron, this is a major question for them. Why both Moses and Aaron?
Huh.
And then they go into explaining why. There's all sorts of things like that those dipping into those other later Hebrew literatures will enrich your reading of the Old Testament.
Absolutely.
So,
oh, that's very cool. Now, you brought a textbook. I believe the textbook you're using for this course. So the course, everybody, is Ancient Hebrew. It's a year-long course with Mr. Graham Sommers. So 11th and 12th graders and any adults who would be interested in participating in our continuing education program. All right, so beginning biblical Hebrew.
So this is by Robert Homestead and John Cook. And I'm really excited about using this textbook this year. It's markedly different than other textbooks for one major reason. The main sin of Hebrew textbooks is telling students way too much, way too soon.
Right.
So I won't name any names, but one of the textbook I've been using tells you everything about, say you're learning the PL, a certain verb form. It'll give you all the information you can possibly know about in a single chapter.
Mm-hmm.
That's not very pedagogically smart. Or it'll give you, even worse, in Hebrew there's binyanim. These are forms or modes that verbs can come in. It'll give you all the binyanim for the past tense verb in a single chapter. So these are like 8 different charts of verbs.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's just not smart pedagogically.
No. You know, the more you talk, the more you sound like you think you're teaching a living language, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I wish there were some more of that with biblical languages.
Yeah. And so this textbook is just it's beautiful. It makes me so happy because I don't know if they'll be able to see this, but the pages are extremely minimalist. Maybe that at first would seem like a downside, but it's not. Learning Hebrew is intimidating, and coming to a page of just paragraphs of text and chart upon chart is really intimidating and discouraging. And what I love about this textbook is, one, their chapters are minimalist, very pared down and simple, which is a huge plus for me.
So I'm looking at this page, everybody, and I can see that there are 10 items for me to do.
Yep.
Just words in Hebrew, and I assume I'm to define them.
Here, these are just little short translation, couple words. And they do have
that's the whole page.
Yeah, that's it. And of course, there will be things to memorize. It's going to be hard work no matter what.
Yes.
But they really simplify things. The second reason this textbook is unique is you'd think more textbooks would do this, but they don't. It's laid out chapter by chapter in a way that would be natural and prudent to as far as an order of what you learn, grammar. So other textbooks are often kind of systematic. You learn everything about nouns for 14 chapters, and then you switch to verbs. Why would you do that? You should be reading a sentence, be able to read a sentence off the bat.
Or two, yeah. Interesting.
So I'm excited about using this. It's different than some of the other textbooks I've seen out there.
Yeah,
so.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I'd love to speak a little more broadly, like beyond the course,
Sure.
on some of your approaches. So your teacher profile mentioned Hebrew novellas. Are those the stories that you're writing? Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about them. Not necessarily as a teacher, but as a writer. What are you doing?
Oh man, well, it's not easy actually to write them, and sometimes I'm pleased with it, and sometimes I'm not.
You sound like a writer.
Yeah. Nevertheless, writing stories has been, especially in Latin, one of my favorite things. So
Mm.
I'm a Latin teacher right now, and every week I write a story for my students. Throughout the year, I've been writing stories, telling stories with my 11th grade. I'm doing Latin Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, nice.
So in Latin, and so I have
Yeah.
to create stories
That's
for that.
a brilliant idea.
It's been really fun. I wish I could do it with you. I just don't have the ability yet.
Yeah.
I would like to get there, but that sort of thing. And I've always really delighted in making stories. It's harder in Hebrew. It just is. So, but another related project to that is I took a medieval Hebrew translation of the Book of Tobit and rewrote it in simplified Hebrew. And again, just to provide students with something that they can read that's easy.
Right.
Earlier on.
But start interacting with some living stuff.
Yep.
So ancient Hebrew, medieval Hebrew, are these languages close enough that, like, I watched an Israeli police like cop buddy comedy series last year with English subtitles, of course, right? But is that the sort of thing that are they close enough that you can understand something like that, or is it too distant?
Oh, you mean your cop show?
Yeah, like if you were watching a
yeah.
modern Israeli TV show.
I don't think I would be able to. They speak very quickly. The vocabulary is different enough.
Yeah.
Syntactically, I don't know modern Hebrew, but from what I've been told and read, syntactically, they're very similar.
Huh. Okay.
And the vocabulary is drawn from the whole history of Hebrew.
So it'd be a leap,
new.
but not a huge leap.
Yeah.
If the syntax is still kind of Okay, interesting. So I wanted to ask you, so we're in this context where classical Christian education, and so many of the people who end up watching this video, so many of the people will end up signing up for Kepler classes and our diploma track. They have a background. They'll have a background in Latin and Greek, but particularly in Latin. And you're a Latin teacher, so I wonder if you could talk about, and obviously we're talking about orthography, we're talking about like phonemes, like the sounds that you make, and like you learn Latin and you're never going to go. I wonder if you could talk to students of Latin about how their experience in learning ancient Hebrew would be similar and how it would be different. And I know that's a very broad question, right? I mean, like if you study Latin and then you go and study Russian, that will also be a hugely different experience. And there's some stuff that you have in common with learning every language. Yeah. So I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
Since it's classical education, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, just to speak of a difference first, Hebrew is syntactically very simple. Great. That's the good news. It's morphologically very difficult. So morphology would be how a verb or noun changes depending on its form. Is it plural, singular, what binyan it's in? That gets a little bit tricky. There are some consonants, some of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet that are called gutturals. Those are the ones you're referring to. Yeah. Those tend to mess up, screw around with the morphology. So they have their own kind of set of rules that you have to learn. So that's where your knowledge of Latin syntax actually will help you, even though Hebrew doesn't have case endings. Okay. Hebrew. Well,
that's a relief, right?
Well, yeah, that might be a relief. But nevertheless, your knowledge of those categories will really help you, because there's still the object of the verb. There's something close to the accusative infinitive in Hebrew, and those categories and those, if you've already got those kind of places in your brain, learning the, certain aspects of Hebrew grammar and syntax will just, it's not a big deal. You'll understand it. The real difference again is the morphology, which just takes patience and practice.
Well, English is such a grammatically simple language as well. It's often a shock for native English speakers to learn, any other language. So I imagine, and I don't know how you'd interact with this idea, but I imagine that, having studied Latin or Greek, but, in so many of our grammatical categories, we cribbed from Latin, right? We still suffer in English grammar from how much we did that, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I want to end a sentence in a preposition and I can. But, there's so from English, you go to Latin and you have to absorb all these new categories and start handling things in a bigger way. I imagine that would, as an English speaker, having that experience, you would be better equipped to learn. Well, it's a whole lot of new languages because you've had to interact and handle so much more.
And like any language, there are aspects of Hebrew that, this is just like the way it is in English. Like the Hebrew article it may not be the exact same, but this is pretty much the same. Or there's a certain word that they use for that. I saw that he did such and such. That's the same. So there's going to be aspects of it that are very natural. On the other hand, there will be aspects that are like, that's so weird. For example, if they want to use a temporal clause, they'll say, and it happened when, Graham went to the store and he saw that there was the bananas on sale or something like that.
Okay.
They'll use two ands, whereas we would translate that something like, when Graham went to the store, he saw that the bananas were on sale. Well, they divide into two separate clauses. That's a little awkward to us.
Right.
So there's both things that we find easy and things that take a lot of getting used to.
Right. What about the writing system? Does that, how much does it, because of course you read Greek, you've got to handle a new alphabet. How do students find the alphabet? And you mentioned the vowel points.
Yeah.
Is it a particular struggle, or is it like, at the same level as just trying to tackle Greek?
It can be a struggle for some people. And I would say different people are just different. Some catch on really quick, especially the pronunciation. Other people struggle to get the pronunciation down, and it takes a long time. And there's kind of two different ways of thinking about it. One is sort of the scientific way where we think, all right, is this an open syllable, a closed syllable? What kind of a vowel is this, long or short? And when you approach it from that way, it's hard for just about anybody. It's like learning math or something like that. On the other hand, when you learn from imitation, which is how we normally learn language, it just kind of, it takes time, but it just kind of comes naturally.
Yes.
You learn to imitate. You learn, okay, the kamat's katan, it's this word, a vowel that makes the sound o. It just kind of happens in these certain situations, and it's not that common, but you start to get a feel for where that happens. So I'm not saying you choose one or the other path. You have to do both, actually. But one is going to be trickier, and most everyone will find that to be difficult to some degree, but also through practicing reading aloud, hearing through pictodicta, especially, that's a big part of it. Just hearing someone pronounce the words with the picture over and over again. You can pick up those words just by imitation and just by repeated hearing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Sweet. So as we approach the end of the stream, I encourage you to ask any questions you might have about this course, about language acquisition, about ancient Hebrew. We also have a Latin teacher on our hands, so feel free to hit him with any of that. I would love to create a couple of sound bites with you right now.
Sure.
And so I'd be interested to hear you tell us why high school students should sign up for ancient Hebrew.
Yeah.
And then I'd love to hear, as a separate thought, why adults might be interested in doing that.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure that I would even separate them out, but I can try. The first reason I think I would say you should be interested in learning Hebrew
is because it's awesome.
Well,
I can see the smile on your face, and that something like that is coming.
Because it's totally awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the first reason is that it makes the Bible strange again, which is Matt, like, think about your favorite book that you've maybe read a few times, or your favorite movie that you watch a million times. What if you could watch that for the first time again? I love the movie The Tree of Life, just moved me. Or, The Brothers Karamazov, that's just an amazing book. Imagine if you could read that for the first time again. Or there's something fresh and just startling, that first impression.
I was talking to a literature teacher last week, and then we had this exact conversation. Well, feeling a bit of envy towards students who get to approach something we love for the first time.
Yes.
And we'll never have that again. Okay, so make the Bible strange.
Exactly. It's like, think about a piece of art. The first time you set your eyes on a beautiful piece of art, you fall in love with it immediately. Maybe the colors really catch your eye. But then think about the art you have on your walls. Like, when was the last time you really noticed that or was moved by that piece of art? Sometimes the Bible ends up that way, or at least we feel that way. Reading English translation, I know the book of Genesis, I know Exodus, I've read this all before. Reading it in Hebrew is sort of, this might sound kind of bad, but it's kind of the difference between eating food with salt and not sometimes. Sometimes reading in English just feels a little bit bland, whereas in Hebrew, things will pop out to you that just don't in English. So I guess my first reason and the first reward of learning Hebrew is this kind of, the Bible becomes terra incognita again. And that's exciting. It's also scary, by the way. It can be very scary. But that's exciting. So that's kind of maybe the first reason I would give is the Bible becomes strange again, which is extremely exciting, and you can fall in love with it again. I remember, for example, reading the story of David in Hebrew for the first time, and it was a page turner. I mean, I was engrossed in it like a novel. So that would be the first reason. Then maybe the second reason would be sort of the other side, where again, going back to your favorite novel, or you've read it 10 times. Well, if you're a good reader, each time you read, you see new things. Every time. Like, again, for me, the book of Brothers Karamazov, every time I think, wow, I understand this character better. I see what's happening in this scene. And you make connections throughout the book. You know, Father Zosima's teachings and Alyosha or whatever. Same thing happens with Hebrew. And when you read the Hebrew Bible again and again, or you read the Torah, you make connections between passages that you wouldn't have otherwise made. And I'm not saying it's impossible to do that with English, but sometimes the textual threads aren't as clear, because of translation, simply because you don't notice words when you're reading in English sometimes. So just to give you an example, the more I read Genesis 1 along with the rest of the Bible, the more you see in it. There's so many things there. So one example that really struck me, I read Genesis 1 and I kept going, and eventually, a year later, whatever, read Leviticus. Okay, and then you read Genesis 1 again, and you think, oh my goodness, Genesis language is Leviticus language. I've never heard anyone say that.
And that's something where it's not just a matter of and of course the Bible in English is the Bible and is the revealed Word of God. But often it's not just a case of things don't jump out at us or that we don't notice. Often, I imagine it must be that there are some connections that exist in Hebrew, in the Hebrew mind and in Hebrew vocabulary that don't exist for us. That the best translation we make is still going to lack some of those more profound connections, just simply because it's another language.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So you think, words of God separating things. When you just read Genesis, you don't think what does that have to do with Levitical laws or clean and unclean? It has everything to do with it. So God separating the light, Hivdil in Hebrew, or mean, kinds. You think that's just kind of God made all the species. Well, this is Leviticus language, these different kinds there, and so on and so forth. Just another example of that with Genesis 1. I just am reading through Joshua right now, and they are to kavash the land, subdue the land. Well, that's what Adam is commanded to do in Genesis, subdue the land. A third example is the Moedim, the set times. The stars are for, I forget exactly the order, but they're for signs, for seasons, for years, I think. Well, these set times are Moedim. These are likely referring to the Israelite holidays in particular. And so Genesis 1 has all these threads to other parts in the Torah that you wouldn't necessarily pick up. And the story of Israel is already kind of foreshadowed in that very first chapter. And so that's just an example of the kind of thing, as you read and reread, you make these connections. And as you read other literature too, the rabbis, they're on top of all those things, and they'll help you see that.
Well, I'm interested to hear, for example, about this connection to Hebrew festivals. That changes how I would read that. But there's another level. That a lot of biblical scholars and pastors they try to absorb information like that. but there's nothing quite like experiencing it, right? That's now a piece of information I know, but I don't know it in my gut. I'd have to learn Hebrew and read it for myself to feel it.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think you failed dismally in separating the high schoolers and the adults from each other, but you succeeded marvelously in telling us why we should take this course.
And if I could say just one more, a third and final reason, is the poetics of Hebrew. So everyone kind of knows this, that if you want to really appreciate Virgil or Homer or something, you have to read it in Latin or in Greek. You just have to. Well, Hebrew has its own poetic style, which is very different than Latin or Hebrew in some ways. So to give you a couple examples, Hebrew words are built off of 3-letter roots, okay? And just 3 letters. So that allows them to do a lot of word plays. They'll mix the letters around to form different words. So the Tower of Babel story really resonates around 3 letters. In English, we translated them maybe N, B, and L, Naval. So these 3 letters are rearranged in all sorts of words. Bricks, let us build, for stone, Babel, let us mix up. So these 3 consonants are sort of worked throughout the whole story. And this is prose, by the way. I mean, it's not even poetry.
Right.
And they're having fun playing with the words. And it's something really cool to see in Hebrew, the coherence, this thread working through it. And there's Hebrew poetry as well, has a lot of other aspects like that. Sounds that you can only hear in Hebrew, alliteration, all those kind of poetic tropes that you can only appreciate in Hebrew, that I would say it's no small thing to be able to see those. So, you might say that's just the poetry of it. But no, that's where the beauty is.
Just the poetry of it. Like, we're not going to allow someone to say that in this room.
So that would be my third reason, that sort of poetic.
Well, Cooper Salmon has a question Graham, I remember you saying that the most important trait in learning a new language is playfulness. And we've been seeing a little bit of that in what you've been saying recently. Can you and Joffrey speak to that a bit more? Playfulness.
Oh, yeah. Well, for one, when you're being playful, you're not afraid. And fear is a very bad thing when you're trying to learn a language.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It actually inhibits your memory. So to go to the Dungeons and Dragons idea, they're having fun. They're forgetting maybe that they're.
But what if the monster they're facing is very scary?
Well, then it's a good kind of fear, and then they won't forget whatever that monster was.
Yeah. So this plays into the total physical response thing that you do.
Yeah. So it's fun, and also playfulness pushes the boundaries. So someone who the best language learner is probably someone who's not afraid to make mistakes. Again, because you're testing the boundaries, and when you're doing that, you discover, I just broke Hebrew grammar, that doesn't work, or you just beautifully, made a touchdown with what you tried there. That was it. You
nailed
did it.
Yeah.
You nailed it. And only if you're being playful and not afraid to try that, will you discover where the boundaries are and make progress. So those would be 2 things. Yeah.
I think teachers have a responsibility to try to establish that tone as much as possible, not to fail to take things seriously, but to establish. So you mentioned fear. So coming at it less from the playfulness side, within my experience, and more from the fear side. So I've taught English as a second language and Spanish in many different contexts to adults. And many different cultures. So, when I was at the English Language Institute at the University of Florida, we had many Saudis and many South Koreans and many Colombians, many Japanese. And as I moved through my career, I started working with Germans a lot. And I started to notice some cultural differences, of course, in how they approach languages. And I loved teaching Germans because they didn't care if they made mistakes.
Really?
Right? But they combined it with this just, and of course I'm generalizing, but this drive for excellence.
Yeah.
Right. But they didn't, their desire to be good informed how they approach making mistakes. They just viewed it as a cost of doing business. Yeah. One of the other cultures, and I won't say which, that I worked with a lot, was one in which I could see that English was highly valued and being learned, but that they mocked each other if they didn't succeed.
Yeah.
So there was a status thing in how, but they responded to that. It wasn't playful, right? So not embarrassing yourself. And as I talk about shame and embarrassment, it's not the culture anyone is thinking of, honestly, you know, so in all my experience over many years of working with this people group, not making a mistake was way too important for them. And it was such a difficulty for me as a teacher to try to get them to a place where they didn't mind making a mistake. and so if a teacher can succeed in creating an environment where people feel free to play, where they're not afraid. You know, and play doesn't necessarily mean playing a game. Like playing Dungeons and Dragons is awesome, really. But it's not about that. It's about doing a workbook without fear.
Yeah, exactly. I tell my students, sin boldly.
Wow, nice. Yeah. All right. Well, it's been just a blast to have you here. Picta Dicta. Well, so when does it go out of beta?
We're planning on the fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So and that'll be an integral part of this course, but it's also available as a product that you can pick up for yourself. And how does that work? So how do people engage? If I were not a high school student, but I'm watching this video and I'm a random seminarian in, we'll say, Indiana. How do I do Picta Dicta?
Yeah, it'll be available to purchase. Right now, it's not up yet, but where Picta Dicta is sold, you will be able to.
Okay. So pictadicta.com.
Yeah, you can get a subscription and
Great. Cool. So yeah, it's actually been a lot. I'm gonna have to find a way to get in on your Dungeons and Dragons Latin game.
It's been fun.
see if my if I can fudge with my Portuguese maybe.
It's been fun.
It's been great having you here. Thank you. And actually, I just discovered that this guy lives very near to here, so I'm gonna. I have a legitimate chance of getting in on the Dungeons and Dragons game. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.